All right. Again, I am Matt. This is Dr. Scott. Again, he requires that I call him Dr. Scott, and I'm just kidding. Um, and before we start, we wanted to tell you a little bit about who we are, what we do, how we do it, and I will start. And so, the very best part of me is my family. I've got three kids. And what probably matters most to you is that I want you all to know that I and my family have gone on the path that we're going to encourage others to do today. I've got three self directed kids that have been homeschooled and on and off over the last, 10 years, 12 years, something like that. Most of that time, my wife and I have been working full time as well. I am a parent coach and have been a parent coach for the last 10 years. I'm also a public speaker. And over the last 20 years, I've been on the board of two universities, including a private college and a selective public university. And that informed a lot of my work. And so for the last 20 years, I've been doing a lot of what we're going to be talking with you about today. So happy to have you here. Thanks.
Okay, Matt. So I'm Dr. Scott, and I live in Montpelier, Vermont. Been a, public school educator for uh, just short of 40 years now, 35 years in Houston. And I worked in HISD, the Houston Independent School District, and I left there in 2008 as a region superintendent. And I had 60 schools, about 54,000 kids I was responsible for. And then I went to Houston A Plus Challenge, which is an educational nonprofit. We worked on classroom practice, principal leadership, and we also launched a pretty neat personalized learning lab school while I was there. Really glad to be with Matt, working on the education game, and really excited to work with each one of you on your journey, and also most importantly your children's journey.
Thanks, Scott, for telling us a little bit about you. Um, what you'll hear from us is that we have a very different background related to education. Scott, from inside the school, understanding of the process of teaching and learning, understanding of the root problems within schools, as we'll probably get into some of that today. Scott's a wealth of information around what's really going on within schools. And then me from outside of the school system, what happens and what's possible in learning outside of the traditional school, and also from the board level. And so Scott's got a couple questions that he wants to push to you today to kind of kick off some of the further conversations of what we're trying to do today.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So we have two questions for you today. One sort of a short-term question, and then one focused on long-term. Here's the short term, and we'll give you maybe a minute to think about this. But in this current situation of COVID, what is the most chaotic part of your child's learning day at this moment in time? Matt and I have heard a lot about chaos, right? Whether it's schools dismissing, sending kids home, Zoom screens not working, kids having a hard time focusing on their work because they're not in school. Who would be willing to share some of your frustrations?
Just go ahead and unmute and
Yeah, just
chime in.
unmute.
Hi, this is Marta, and I'll share something with um, my high schooler. He's in 11th grade, and he has a Spanish class, AP Spanish that he's been taking, but the teacher just never shows up ever. And this has been going on since August, and we've reached out to the school about it, and they've sent in a substitute for about a week, and I guess to appease us. And then it happened again and again. Zooms would start, but he would never be let in. He'd be in the waiting room the whole time, or so it's just very frustrating that schools are not being held accountable for things like that. And although they want the kids to be, we got a letter saying that he has all these absences and he's at risk of whatever the threat was. And I'm saying he has absence because the teacher isn't there and is marking him absent. So very frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be extremely frustrating. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Lois, and I have two grandkids that are first grader and a second grader. And my daughter's an essential worker. She just had another baby maybe a month ago. But anyway, long story short, I've been filling in, helping on days that she had to work. And my background is in education also. But what I'm finding on the Zoom, the setup that they have for the children at that age, they need a lot of hands-on from home. And if you have two kids that are on different levels, they're listening to different instructions, you know, they got different teachers, of course. Then they have maybe an hour face to face with the teacher. Then they're asked to go to the hub or some other place where they're having to self engage. So that's a very it's a difficult thing for, I think, as a grandparent, as a parent, I'm sure parents are having the same problems if they're having to work from home too. But I just find it's hard for the kids to be able to maneuver sometimes on their own to go from place to place. So that's one of the issues that I have. And then one day my granddaughter had I have nothing against people with a heavy accent, but she had a teacher. She's my granddaughter's first grader. And she had a teacher that had a heavy accent, and she thought she said, "Gravity, he's speaking Spanish. I don't understand." So I think that was another something that they need to be aware of the substitutes, and he was like a substitute for those couple of days because the main teacher was out. So, but anyway, it's a struggle, and I'm sure people are having the same issues. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. It is a struggle. So thanks for sharing. So let's talk a little bit about long term, because hopefully, fingers crossed, we're all going to get through this COVID. But Matt and I want you to think more about the future moving forward. And here's the second question: can you describe the value that you will feel, or more importantly, they will feel when they become a lifelong learner? What's the value to you about doing this type of work for your most loved one?
I'm on a different spectrum. My son is only 4, and I opted for in-person preschool because his school was the first school to close in Houston. We literally went to school one day, and then they never went back. No closure. He was 3 at the time, and so they had a really hard time, and it was the first in the entire city. So I opted for him to go back because he is so young, and all of the things with virtual and sitting still, and so they finished out the 3-year-old with just a recorded video, and he did that okay. But for structure and socialization and being 4, I chose to send him back. But he does get disappointed because things that they can't do, like they can't have the little, and it's just more concrete for him, some of the things that they are not able to have this year in terms of some of the toys, some of the outings, some of the events that they would have had, they're not able to have. And that's the school is preschool and K through 12. So, the entire institution is affected. But for him to be, so young, that was my reason for having him actually go back.
Anyone else like to share a value real quick?
For me, it's important for my kids to be lifelong learners because, frankly, I'm tired of having to tell them over and over again what to do, how to do it, when to do it. It's frustrating. If they were able to do those things on their own, and it would be a burden off of me, it would eventually be a burden off of them, although they don't think so. So yeah, it's really important to get the ball rolling with them in terms
Yeah.
of getting them to
Yeah.
be independent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for sharing that. So these two questions really explain why Matt and I are here this morning. We're here to try to make your lives less chaotic on the short term. And then long term, we want to help you help your children become lifelong learners. So, in order to do that, you have to have a plan. And one of the things that I learned inside of the school district is that oftentimes what school plans are working on isn't necessarily what your kids really need. And so Matt and I are convinced that working on skills like reading, communication, writing, and oral, problem solving in the areas of math and science, social studies, and also let's don't forget about character. It's really those four skills that, if you work on, can produce a really strong, lifelong self directed learner. Here's what I know about schools schools aren't going to develop plans around individual skill development. They're just not going to do that. They have too many kids. We want to enable you as parents to help your kids to become self directed learners. The long term goals is that, schools really care about learning when it informs tests and when it informs grades. And so we want to kind of break away from that. We believe that all kids must become lifelong learners. And why do we believe that? Because both Matt and I have lived it. He's lived it outside of the school with his kids, and I've lived it inside of traditional school systems. We're going to share a couple stories about why we believe what we do.
Thanks, Scott. And so for me, I'll start with my story, and it starts with, like most stories about education, with my child. My child was born, my son. He is now 18. He used to be really cute and cuddly. Now he's got muscles and he, has hair all over him and things like that. But I wanted the best for him, which meant finding the best schools, finding the best learning environments, the best, most rigor, etc. Grades and homework were really, really important to me, including, I'm embarrassed to say, including in kindergarten. And I realized looking back that I was really pushing down on his curiosity to make room for more and more school. Compliance was really what I was after. And I was so certain that this was the script that I wanted to work with, because I knew it was going to work. And the script was grades, homework, and compliance, right? Grades, homework, and compliance. But I began to interact with some other parents who were doing things differently. And this was some years ago. And I actually saw this from the university level. 17 years ago, I was invited to attend or to serve on a selective public university board. And I began to see how routine, how common the script was I was playing. The grades, compliance, test scores, all these things. These were what all the kids had that were coming to university. High grades, very compliant, good test scores. And they volunteered at the Children's Hospital because that's how you prove that you care about other people, apparently. But then there were these other applicants, and they were discussed in the admissions office. They were discussed at the board level. And these were kids who were authentically curious. They were passionate learners, and they were self-driven. And you could tell this because they had these amazing portfolios, experiences. They built products and services without anybody telling them to do it. They were self-directed. And when they applied to college, here's another interesting dynamic. They would often apply to a college not because the college had a great name, but because there was a faculty member that they wanted to study with at that university, right? Now, those are the kids that catch the attention of admissions officers. And we've been talking to quite a few admissions officers about this idea of self-directed learning. And we're hearing consistently that the script that I was playing, it's tired. And there's kids from all over the world now that are playing that script, and frankly, most of them are a lot hungrier than we are. So these families that were following a different script, they slowly began to build independence in their child. It wasn't with threats or with incentives. It was with coaching and negotiation. And these parents were teaching kids how to solve their own problems along their educational pathway. And again, this is what universities were actually looking for. So some years ago, I began to flip the script and began to focus on building learning independence. And it turns out, if you fast forward, that building learning independence and flipping the script produces not just curious learners, but also produces great students. And it also produces, probably more importantly, it produces really good humans, people of character, people who are problem solvers, people who read because they're curious, people who are excellent communicators because they're always asking questions, right? That is what I wanted for my kids. And as I flipped the script, it started to show up. Now, this is not all rosy, right? This was a hard slog, but some of what we've learned now, and Scott actually has helped me learn a lot of this. We have learned and has now started incorporating in our family. And I have a story. My son is a valedictorian in his high school. Frankly, was bored for a good chunk of the time, and so started to learn things on his own. My daughter, after being a straight A student at local magnet high school, decided she wasn't learning fast enough. She wasn't learning the stuff that she wanted to learn, wasn't learning deeply enough. And so she built her educational pathway starting at 15. And so as I wind this part of my background down, there's two pieces that I want you to remember. The first is that schools think that learning hinges on what they do. We don't believe that. We believe that learning hinges on what you do as the parent. And so, and then the second part about this really is that our society is shifting, y'all. And COVID has turbocharged it, right? Students who are waiting to be taught are going to be left behind now. The future is going to look nothing like what we imagined it to look. But the thing that we do know is that learners are going to be okay, because there's so much change happening. If you are an independent learner, you are going to be okay. So my script shifted from my highest aspiration, kind of wanting grades and homework and compliance, to really those pillars that Scott talked about, the idea of reading, communication, problem solving, and character being the key pieces that I wanted my kids to be strong in. And my kids are strong there. Not perfect by any stretch, but they're strong, and they're a little weird. But I want you to know that normal in education in the United States is broken. And so if normal's broken, then I kind of want weird. And if you're interested in having kids that are, really strong in these, you can start this at any time. We started late for some in our family, but it creates a different type of individual. And if this is what you're interested in, then this is what we're about, and we'd ask you to continue working with us. If you're not interested in this, though, it's great. It's great to let you know that quickly, and that it'd be great for you to now log off, because the rest of this conversation is going to be wasting your time otherwise. So on that happy ending, Scott, can you give us a quick overview of kind of your story?
Yeah, sure, Matt. And I hope that there aren't a lot of people logging off, because I think my story is pretty compelling. So of all the kids that I came into contact with over my 35 years, I want to share a story of 50 11 to 13-year-olds. And they were part of the personalized learning lab school that we launched. When they first got to us, they didn't really know how to operate as self-directed learners. They were passive. They were looking at the adults to tell them what to do, and we almost had to shut the lab down because there wasn't a lot happening in the first month to 2 months. But then something interesting happened. Some of those youngsters started to negotiate about their learning with their adult learning leaders. They started to invest. They started to define. They started to plan. They started to execute. They started to evaluate. And it was a progression. Like no one did that all at one time. But after 6 months, I told Matt this, that probably 45, 46 of those kids, after 6 months now, I would describe them as self-directed, independent, lifelong learners, meaning that they did not need any adults to help them define, plan, execute, or evaluate their own learning. 6 months. And so now I'm going to share some of the results in terms of learning that we saw with these kids compared to their traditional counterparts. Here's a promise that most schools make to families. The normal school learning expectation is the line at the bottom. You spend 3 years with us, we can promise you 3 years of growth. The promise we made to the learning lab was called A Plus Up. The promise we made to those families was 4.5 years of growth over 3 years. What we actually ended up with after 3 years was 5.1 years of reading growth and 5.7 years on the average of math growth. So when we saw this, we were like, we're on to something. This has the ability to be transformational. So then we took a look at how those lifelong learners, those 11 to 13-year-olds, compared to traditional students in the state of Texas. And this is how they performed compared to traditional school learners in the area of reading, writing, math, science, and social studies. So if anyone tells you that you're crazy for taking this path, I want you to think back to these two slides. This can absolutely happen for not only your children, but your friends' children. And then I guess I'll just finish up my story with a quick student story or learner story about JC. So when JC came, JC was one of these kids that was in the lab school. When JC came to us, all she wanted to do was work on fashion design. And so for 6 weeks, the adult learning leader let JC do just that. She just worked on fashion design. She researched. She looked at examples on the web. She kind of drew her own fashion design ideas. And after 6 weeks, the adult learning coach pulled JC aside, and she said, JC, you're doing really good work in fashion design, but you don't really read very well, and your problem solving capabilities really need some improvement. So I'd like to spend more time, and I'd like you to spend more time working on those skills. You know what JC said? JC said, sure, let's build that into my learning plan. Now, you know why JC said that? Because JC understood that people were investing in her passion, fashion design, before they started to talk about the other skills. And that's something that schools oftentimes don't do. They start with sort of their agenda and then allow, sometimes, not all the time, but the learner to sort of negotiate in their interests. But for the most part, schools are all about the things that they want to teach and they expect kids to learn.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Scott. Guys, reminding you, the chat box is open. Feel free to send notes. We will do our best to respond when we're not running our mouth here. But let me now. So Scott did describe, kind of set up his experience on the educational side of what's possible. Here is now a reminder of why you're here. Most of you realize that something's not working in education. COVID got all our attention, right? But it's bigger than COVID. And here is what I mean by that. There is a movement that's happening right now. On the left side of this graph is traditional school. Some of what Scott just talked about in terms of what schools are really after, compliance, standardization, etc. But the right side is really where we are moving as a society, and you can see it everywhere. So I want you to take a moment and look at this, and then I'm going to ask you a couple questions about it. Okay, I'm going to move things along here. Some of the key points are this idea of learning anywhere, flexible content, and learner-led. Those are the key pieces that I'm going to kind of drill on. But I want you to remember this graphic, and I want you to now look at this. And now we're seeing the continuum between, on the left, traditional school, and on the right, producing a lifelong learner. Now here's the questions I want to ask you. First one. If you could put where your child is on this continuum, what number would you put them at? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? And then the second question, you don't need to answer this yet. The second question is, where do you want them to go? Where do you want them to be? That gap, that delta, is what we are hoping to help you with. Now, we had wanted to open it up to talk about this a little bit more. We're running a little short on time. I've got one person that, actually, why don't you go ahead and answer these questions in your chat? Thank you, Chandra. She said there are 3, she wants them to be a 5. I have another 2 wants to be a 5. Olathia, thank you, Olathia. Here's the thing. Every single parent we've talked to about this over the last several weeks and months as we've been kind of synthesizing this dynamic, every single parent wants their child to move to the right on this continuum, right? Maybe not all the way to 5, but every single one wants them to move to the right because they're sick and they're tired of traditional school, and they realize that the world has shifted so dramatically that if we're doing anything traditional, then we're almost by definition losing, right? Okay, so Scott, I think, well, I'll do this really briefly. There's another image we want to show you real quick. Some of you who've been a part of our work before have seen something like this. This is the shift that moves a child into being self-directed. I know this is a little bit busy graph. Let me just kind of orient you to it. On the top left, the dark line is the parent and the leadership that they are influencing over the child's life. As the child ages up, that influence ideally should drop down to the point where the child, again, the blue dotted line is the child, where the child is now taking more and more ownership of their own life. And those are some examples of what we mean about a child who's beginning to negotiate to being able to make more decisions for themselves, and the parent intentionally moving back to let that child move into a self-directed learning environment. That is the training in the course that we're going to be talking about a little bit later to actually facilitate this. And Scott, when I first did this first graphic, Scott, you may remember, I put ages at the bottom. And Scott's like, you know what, Matt? No, don't put ages, because you don't know when this transition is going to happen for the child. It could be an 8-year-old who's now taking much more ownership of their life. It could be an 18-year-old who's still struggling with that. The point, though, is that there's got to be a plan to move the child to the place where they are self-directed, and that's what we're doing. So got another note from Eloise, who says that her I think that was grandson, wants to go from a 1 to a 5. Great. That's what we're here about. Now, Scott's going to talk to you a little bit about how we're going to do that.
Yeah, so earlier on we talked about short-term and long-term. So Matt and I are here to support you on both. Through this COVID mess, we're here to support you. But what I really want you to think about, and I think Matt agrees, is what is it going to look like when there is massive shift on that continuum from number 1 to number 5. That, my friends, is going to be a beautiful day, because once you own your learning, no one can take that away from you. Matt and I talk about this a lot. We think that this self-directed learning power, it might be the civil rights issue of our time. And that shift and that lovely day, that beautiful day, begins on the journey that I hope some of you are thinking about stepping forward today to do. So let's talk about what that looks like. Matt and I have developed a set of tools. We think they are tools that can really help you. But, it's really important. All of these tools are sort of in a beta phase right now. We are testing these tools to see if they are effective to allow you and your child to get the outcomes that you are after. But just to run through them, and we're going to get into some detail about these, but we've got a scouting report, which basically captures your current reality. We have a game plan that we'd like to work with you with or on. It's sort of a future thinking document. What is learning going to look like for your child over the next weeks, over the next months? The scouting report and the game plan are going to be free, but we think you might need some help filling out, especially that game plan. And so Matt and I have developed a course to help you, make the first steps, but more importantly, all of the steps in this journey. And then we have a calendar that we'd like to share with you. But the first thing that Matt's going to go over is very briefly describing the scouting report. Matt?
Scott, I got to tell you, you missed a number. You missed number 5 on this.
Oh, I did?
Yes, you did. Because number 5.
I don't see number 5 on my screen.
Let me bring it up for you.
5?
Let me bring it up for you.
All right.
That's the other thing. That we're going to make sure that you guys recognize that this is actually incredibly exciting. So we're going to get you pumped up about this opportunity in front of you. All right. So let's not forget that that's the fifth one, Scott, is actually the key one that we're actually looking at. All right. A little levity here, huh? Let's get into the scouting report. So Scott talked about the tools that we're going to share with you. The scouting report is the first one. It's a series of questions, kind of like the questions you're asked when you go to the doctor's office, except we're not going to judge you if you smoke or drink. Right, Scott?
That's right, Matt.
Scott may
no
ask
blame,
for
no shame.
No blame, no shame, no judgment. But seriously, these are questions that schools never ask, and they certainly don't ask them in relationship between the child and the parent, which again, we believe that these are fundamental questions, and the interplay between the child and the parent is the key dynamic. So here's a couple of examples of some of the questions that you're going to see on the scouting report. Well, here's actually the scouting report. It's a few pages long, lots of questions, and again, this will be an online document, but here are some examples of some of the questions. And what I mean when I say they're hard questions and questions you've never or rarely asked, maybe never asked, here are some examples. On this one, the one that I like, the one that I really have been paying close attention to with my kids is number 19 there. I like to create new ways of doing things. For particularly one of my kids, they really get locked in tight into this is what it's supposed to be, and I've been really working on them to try to build outside of that. So here are examples of questions that may be hard for your child to answer. Here are a few more. That really frame deeper level conversations. These are not, yes or no, right or wrong answers, of course, but they're also not answers you can usually answer. They're not questions you can answer without some real thought. So here's some examples of, again, some of the other questions. Again, these, in our view, are the foundational questions that never get discussed in education, but without them, not much is going to happen. And frankly, y'all, a lot of these questions are really aimed at character. Because again, character, without character, it's going to be good. It's going to be hard to train up a child. So this is the first tool that we're going to give to you. And once you complete this tool, then you will get something called the game plan, which Scott mentioned a moment ago. And Scott, you're going to go ahead and give a brief summary about the game plan, right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I am, Matt. Thanks. Mm-hmm. So the game plan basically takes all the information from the scouting report and starts to push it into these 4 questions. What do we want kids to learn, and why? I think the why is a really important question, especially for the learner. How will we know they've learned it? What will we do if they don't learn it? And a question that sometimes is forgotten about: what will we do when they do learn it? The simple answer there is celebration, right? Success. If we can take a look at the game plan in greater detail, a lot of those questions that are on the scouting report are going to be transferred into what Matt and I call dials. We don't really have time today to get into the dials. It's Matt and my intention, for those of you who want to take the next step with us, to have a special hour where we walk you through the scouting report, and then another hour where we help you work on these dials and work on the overall game plan. But these dials are really going to be important because it's going to set up the conversation between you and your son or daughter. It's a really important conversation because this is where, the negotiation and where the plan is really, really developed. But if you just kind of scroll through the game plan, we can show there's a section on planning of learning. There's a section around the 4 questions that we just showed you around what do we want them to learn? How do we know that they've learned it? What are we going to do if they don't learn it? What are we going to do if they do learn it? So this is an organic document. This changes all the time in terms of success and struggle. Success, struggle, practice, feedback. Right. That's the game plan. Now, if you go through the 1 hour scouting report and the 1 hour game plan, and you still want some help from us, we're going to provide that help. We've got a course that we're planning on offering, again, a beta course. We think this is going to be helpful, but we're not sure. So we want to take some parents and their children through this course. This course is aligned, by the way, with the game plan. And so if you're going through the game plan and you're stuck somewhere, there's probably an episode in the course that is designed for you. But if we just kind of focus in on some of the topics that are going to be discussed, you can sort of see episode 1. If you're having problems with the dials, we can help you with that. Episode 2 and 3 are really around the planning of learning and how you build a real good plan around skills. Episode 4 and 5 start talking about how you use time, space, and talent differently than what schools might do, and how you find resources for your learner. And then let's don't forget about evaluation and also interventions. And then we've got an optional episode around change leadership, because your household is going to change as you move through this process, for sure. Matt?
Definitely. Great point about the household changing. Yes, that's an unappreciated or underappreciated dynamic. Okay, so now let's really give you a quick overview of the calendar, so that you can kind of see how this all shakes out in terms of the timing of it. Briefly, and again, we're going to send you all these documents so that you then have this stuff as a resource. But briefly, today is the 14th. Next week, we're going to be sending out a video of the scouting report, some of our thoughts on it, some of the questions that we think are more difficult and what's behind the questions, how to really complete that well. And then each week we're going to have live conversations like this where it'll be really Q&A, right? We won't be talking so much. We'll be asking you, what do you think? What did you learn? What are the things you're wrestling with? The next week we're going to have another video about the game plan within a conversation the following Saturday around the Q&A around those items. And then as this course starts to begin, what you'll see is that on Monday and Friday you're going to get a video from us with information and then with actions that we're going to encourage you to take with your child. And again, this is a with dynamic. This is not a doing to your child. This is a with. And then the day after, we'll have a check-in where we have a live Q&A about that episode. So this is the process that we'll follow, and we think this is the best way to get you the information you need, but also give you the opportunity to talk with us about questions that you might be struggling with. We go through January to the last episode, and then we'll have a conversation about next steps. So really, a part of this is almost like 10 sessions, video sessions with 10 check-ins, live check-ins based on those sessions. And so that's what we're offering.
So you're probably wondering, well, this looks fantastic. We hope you're thinking this.
Scott, right?
Hoping. But you're probably thinking, okay, how much is this going to cost me? Well, remember, early on in our meeting today, we talked about all of this is a beta process. We think the scouting report, the game plan, and the other tools that we've put together, and with us supporting you, the process is valuable. We're willing to give you the scouting report and the game plan for free. But because you're a beta group, one of the reasons why this is not really priced out specifically at this point is we want your feedback. We want you to be thought partners with us. When the course is over, what Matt and I agreed upon is you can pay us what you think this whole course, this whole process is worth to you. If you don't think it's worth anything, and we hope that's not the case, but if you come to that conclusion, again, no blame, no shame. That's valuable information to us too.
Yeah. No, just
you were going to say.
Well, just remarking about this, not free. We're making it available, but we're hoping that we find value in it. And if not, that's okay. That just means that we're not doing what we are hoping to do, which is to change how people think and operate regarding their kids and their kids' learning. So, Scott, I don't know if you had more to add there.
Yeah, and remember, folks, what we talked about earlier in the session, and that is short-term, long-term. So short-term, we want to give relief to you during COVID. We want your child to be thinking about starting a business or researching the latest information on the COVID vaccine when they're on the screen with their teacher versus playing with the dog or thinking about playing a video game. Long term, We want to help you develop all of your children into self-directed, independent, lifelong learners. And I think we've made the case for that. I don't even think we had to make the case, Matt. I think most folks understand why that's important.
Great, great. Okay, so I see a question here. Let's just finish this up, and then we're just got another minute or two more, and then we'll take questions. So next steps is again this idea of the promise and the plan. This is the promise that you're making for your child, and then a plan to achieve it. Our next steps are to send you what we call the starter packet, which is it'll be a survey. It'll be the scouting report PDF that you saw, but it'll also be an online link so that you can complete that survey or that scouting report online. We'll send you the calendar so you can start blocking time in your calendar, and we'll also send you a video of today's conversation, edited down a little bit so you don't hear all of our chatter, so that you can remember some of the things that we may have talked through. So that's what you'll receive from us in the next hour or so. And then your next steps are if you're interested, to complete the scouting report with your child. And again, I don't know if I really talked about that, Scott, but the point of this is that we're asking you to begin to model learning for your child. So when you sit down and talk through the scouting report, you're answering the questions and your child's answering the questions. You're struggling with the same issues he's struggling with or she's struggling with, right? You'll watch the scouting report video, which will be coming out on Wednesday. And then you will hopefully submit the scouting report back to us, so we know then that means you're in on future activities. Again, all that is free, and we won't even ask about money again until the end of the course. And we'll say, listen, here's how you can contribute if you're interested, but this is what our promise is to you as you're making a promise to your own child.
And, Matt, I don't know whether we covered this, but this webinar is called The Promise and the Plan. You know what the promise is, right?
Yes, I do. I think.
Well, let's tell everyone what the promise is.
Okay.
The promise, I just put out a short video. I don't know whether anyone saw it on social media, but I called it The Gift. And the promise is you're going to have a conversation with your young loved one, and you're going to say, "I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to make you a promise. I'm going to help you turn into a self-directed, independent, lifelong learner, and we're going to do this together." And you know what the plan is, right, Matt? Of course you do.
Of course I do. I would hope.
The plan is how we execute on the promise. Don't make the promise unless you got a plan.
Good. All right, so that's it. A little over time. My apologies for that, but we want to go ahead and now turn it over for questions, and we have one question already around what's the typical industry standard for the course. Well, I will tell you, and Scott, maybe you can jump in too. I will tell you that I've not seen anything like this. Every single learning strategy that I've seen is aimed at helping the schools improve, and those that are aimed at parents are really helping parents learn how to do school better. Right? That's what's different about all this conversation. So I really don't have anything to really compare it to, because I just haven't seen anything where people are talking about what we would argue is far more valuable than doing school better. And that's making your child prepared and ready to not need school. So,
yeah, you remember when Matt talked about flipping in terms of what he did with these kids? Well, think about we're going to flip the relationship with schools. And that is, in the past, schools have pretty much defined, planned, executed, and evaluated everything that has to do with learning. And when that happens, your kids become passive participants. We're going to flip that. Um, your kids, your grandkids, your loved ones, they are going to be active learners. They're going to be able to define, plan, execute, and evaluate. And if the school can help them do that, then we are totally thumbs up, right? But the most important consideration is time is valuable. So if that school that you're sending your kid to for 8 hours is not delivering the product that you want, that you promised your loved one that you are going to give them, then we need to make some adjustments to that.
Yeah. Another question from Bethany: what age group would you target for this course? Scott, you want me to answer that, or do you want to do it?
Yeah. So, you know, just like when I told Matt to take the age off of that chart, I think we need to stop talking about age, and we need to start talking about individual development. And so my answer to that is I think that this is a conversation that for all of the folks that want to participate in the beta group, as you're submitting your scouting report, you might want to make a note. We don't know whether this is going to be appropriate for our kid because, and maybe it's an age consideration. And I can promise you that you're going to get a phone call or some type of an outreach from either Matt or myself to figure out, if this is the right fit. So, like, the short answer is, I think this is appropriate for all ages.
And I'll just jump in. What we're really doing is we're training you, the parent, to develop plans aimed at building learners. And so, regardless of the age, and again, I look back and I think about how I could have done things better and differently had I had this knowledge when the kids were super young. But no, it's not about the child. It's more about the parent's ability to help to shape the child in a different direction based on a different way of thinking.
Hey, Matt, and let's don't forget. A lot of times, because we've created these places called schools, some parents, not all parents, but some parents think, well, I'm not really trained to teach X, and I'm not really trained to teach Y. Parents, I've got 4 kids. We taught them potty training. We taught them how to walk. We taught them how to talk. We taught them some of the most complex learning ever imaginable. So you can do this. No one knows that kid better than you.
Yeah. And thank you, Scott. And when they start to show signs of learning and independent learning, you don't have to teach them. They learn on their own. That's the key, right? That's the part that's just mind-blowing to me, that early on, a child can actually say, oh, I can figure this out. One of the things Scott was, I've been teasing Scott because all this technology, some of which wasn't working so great today, but all this technology, I taught myself how to do it over the last few weeks and months. And I was telling Scott, look, Scott, any question I have about how to do something, I can answer it in 30 seconds. I know exactly how to navigate to find answers. And Scott, when you want to say what the phrase you said to me?
Sure. Your kids, your grandkids know how to do a lot of this already. So we just need to guide them, help them define, plan, execute, evaluate. I don't know whether most kids need 8 hours of adult teaching / direction in order for them to get to where they need to go. I just don't know that anymore.
Yeah. Scott, the phrase Scott said to me was, kids are now driving. Right? The idea that they can now learn and they can figure things out. They're actually in the driver's seat in a way that we older folks may be uncomfortable with. So anyway, that's that. Other questions? If there are no more questions, then you can expect the starter packet coming in about an hour, and we hope that you will join us in this process. I can tell you one last thing as I'll close. It's not going to be easy. It is going to be difficult. I can promise you that, but I can also promise you that it is going to be worth it, because at some point in the future, you're going to start seeing things in your child that's going to give you the peace of knowing that your child is going to be okay without you. And that is, I think, what every parent ultimately wants. And so that's the promise that we feel like we can give today. All right.
And there's going to be some fun. There's going to be some fun moments too.
That's
right.
You know what? We're so serious about this, Scott, but yes, fun is actually part of the learning plan, right? It's not all dry, right? So, all right. So that's it. Thank you guys for joining us today. And you can also email us at any time. You can go matt@theeducationgame.com or scott@theeducationgame.com to email us if you have questions. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.